Welcome to Preventing People Problems, a podcast brought to you by the HR department. Today we'll be talking about the role of performance management and not just when things aren't going well. Hello and welcome to this episode of Preventing People Problems brought to you by the HR department. Today we are going to be talking about performance management and I have two amazing HR department licensees with me. Hello ladies.
Hello.
Could you both introduce yourselves?
Yeah. Hello, my name's Diane Mactavish. I'm a licensee with the HR department. My area is Newcastle North and North Tyneside.
You can tell by the accent.
I know. I keep trying to disguise it, but it just sneaks out. So I've been with the HR department just over a year now. Literally just over a year. And prior to that, I have worked in HR for over 30 years. So I've worked in lots of different sectors, lots of different organisations, seen a whole raft of HR issues in my time.
Brilliant.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Good.
I'm Helen Gilfillan and I'm a licensee for the HR department in Bishops Stortford and Harlow. I've got two territories. I've been with the HR department now for just over 5 years. How time flies when you're having fun. Prior to that, a bit like Diane, I've got over 30 years experience within industry. Yep. Mainly private industry, a lot of manufacturing, a little bit of public sector, police, which is quite interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. A few interesting learning experiences came out of that one.
I can imagine.
But various levels of the organisation, joined the HR department 5 years ago.
Brilliant. Well, welcome both of you.
Thank you.
So we're going to talk about performance management. Let's start with at the beginning, shall we? When people join, let's talk about inductions and probationary reviews. How should employers be doing it?
Well, now that's a good topic because it is actually one of my bugbears, that the amount of people that clients will call me or new clients will call me and say, got to the end of probation, they're just not working out. So I need to sort of dismiss them.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so they're aware that they've got performance issues. Oh
No.
I've not spoken to no, not spoken to them. Seriously, you've not spoken to them in 6 months?
Yeah.
So I think from the very beginning, for me, it's important that expectations are set from day one.
Okay.
You should have knowledge of someone's experiences, their levels of expertise, their levels of competence, and their areas of development from the interview stage. So that forms your basis of the probation period. Because if you're then measuring someone's performance during the probation period, what you're measuring it on, if it's just gut feel and they're just not working out. So I think from the employee's perspective, it's fair for their point of view that they have expectations set. And I think that's where it should start, really. They don't have to be massive objectives, but if there's learning, there's systems development, whatever their job is, it should be easy to set performance reviews.
And thinking about our listeners being all small business owners, as we know, especially when you're really small, you're not that structured when it comes to managing people, especially in the early days. So how important is it that we have to be setting objectives? What's the important bit in those early stages?
Yeah, I think it all starts with the recruitment process,
Okay.
like Helen's just said, because I think it's about pulling out what their key strengths are, where their areas of development are when they're coming into that new role. And your induction is critical at that point in terms of how you welcome somebody in. So a lot of it is about setting somebody up for success from the very beginning. So being very, very clear in terms of induction, setting those expectations, making sure that they've got clear objectives and a development plan to go alongside. So what support are they going to have? What areas of learning development are they going to get during that 6 months? And being really, really clear about when your review periods are. Because I find, I don't know if you, but I get a lot of questions about how often should I have a review, or like you said, they get to the very end of the 6 months and it's like, well, we'll set some objectives, but we've not checked in with them, and now we're at the end, and they're not performing. What do we do? So it's been really, really clear around all of that in terms of those expectations, those touch points during that probationary period, and really being clear with that individual about what your expectations are. And it doesn't have to be a really, complex thing. It can be very, very simple, but it just sets the scene for that individual coming into that workplace.
Even if it's good, because you have so many people like, I don't know if I'm doing a good job. My kids start a job and they go, I don't know if I'm doing very well. No one's spoken to me.
Yeah.
So even if they're doing a good job, it's pointing those bits out. So it's that regular feedback, whether it's good or not so good.
Yeah. And it's understandable, isn't it? Because when you're a manager, you're busy, you're managing a bunch of people. What gets your attention is the bad stuff. What gets your attention is the problem people.
Yeah.
So, it's easy to forget when people are doing good. But then what happens when you don't tell them? You lose them. And then you've got to recruit all over again, and it's cost a fortune. And then you regret not putting the effort in the first place.
But even in a form, if you have a few self-assessment questions for the individual, it gives the manager a starting point as to how they think they're doing. What areas are they struggling with, what are they doing well at, and what do they still need support with. And they set the scene to help the manager. So if the manager's got 3 or 4 new starters that they're managing, get the employee to do a little bit of the assessment as well, and then you can see if there's any gaps.
That's a really good point, actually. That's really helpful. So really, if the very least they just had a form and just diarised in a monthly check-in, that's really all that it needs.
Like you say, it doesn't have to be complex. It's just that touch point, isn't it, in terms of making sure that they're on track, finding out how they're doing, how are they finding the job, because sometimes, small businesses especially, if they've got a lot of turnover, so they're losing people really quickly in that probationary period, and they come to us wanting some help with their retention, that's one of the things that I would always be looking at. What is your induction process? How are you welcoming people in? Are you setting those clear expectations and those clear objectives for them to be working to, so everybody's clear what they need to do, and then they can sort of crack on and get on with the job. And it does make that business owner or that manager's life so much more easier if you've just spent that time at the very beginning.
And attitude is everything, isn't it? I mean, if you've got an employee who really wants to learn, they're trying to do their best, they just need a bit more support, it's worth spending time with those guys to get them up to speed, rather than just, as you say, they're not good enough, they've got to go. Because then you've got to start the whole process again. But if the attitude isn't there, then maybe they do have to go.
I mean, there are
brutally.
Let's be brutal. But you might buddy them up with someone as well, so they've got a buddy. But if the manager's not always available, especially in today's world with a lot of remote working, it's ensuring that if they're coming into the office as a newbie, that there are people in the office that are there to support them.
And I think that's a whole different skill set, managing people that are remote.
Yes.
And there aren't a lot of experts out there that can do that well.
It was thrown upon us slightly, wasn't it?
It was a bit. Okay, so they've passed their probation. They're doing fine, so we can just forget about them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No.
So what does good look like?
I think for me personally, what good looks like, again, it's back to setting everybody up for success, not setting them up for failure. So coming out of that probation, again, it's setting them clear objectives for the next year ahead, linking them in with the appraisal process, regular sort of supervisions, just keeping that conversation going a lot of the time can really help, because then you can identify anything that's cropping up really, really quickly, and you can deal with it really, really quickly. Whereas if you're not having that, that regular dialogue, that regular conversation, that they can come to you and say, I know I did this during the probation, but I didn't really understand it. Can somebody just take me through it again? That's quite a difficult thing for somebody to say when they're really new. If they, or they think, well, they've already shown me once, twice. I don't want to ask again. And it's just making sure you've got that really open dialogue, that you can have those conversations. People feel that they can come forward with that. And then again, you can just deal with it, because a lot of the problems come from once you're out of the probationary period, come from people thinking, I'll just leave it. I know they've got this little bit of a performance issue, but we'll just leave it. And that never ever works.
Or cover it up, or take the work away, get someone else to do that bit.
And it never works doing that.
Much better to just invest a little bit of time to get people up to speed rather than...
Yeah.
And it's always time, isn't it? That's always the objection. I haven't got time to manage that person. Oh, but then how are you going to find the time to recruit someone to replace them? And
And I think also in terms of what good looks like, a lot of companies are moving away from that annual appraisal.
Yes.
That was always a little bit of an HR tick box exercise.
Yeah.
Whenever I was in industry, it's like, oh, here we go again. It's the appraisal process.
Yeah.
Keep HR happy. We'll just fill it out.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, I think what's included sometimes in the documentation is not the most important part. It's the quality of the conversation.
Yes.
But it's having those regularly and not just a once a year exercise, because if it's once a year you could be sitting with someone for an hour and a half, whereas if you have those regular check-ins, even if they're one-to-ones, even if everything's going well, it might be a 15-minute catch-up. But I speak to people and they say, oh yeah, we do one-to-ones, but only if there's a problem. But then that sort of giving a negative connotation to the whole performance management process, because you're only going to speak to someone regularly if they've got a problem. So it's just being consistent and having a process that is
a massive risk to losing your good people. Surely, if you're not talking to them.
It's a big retention issue, isn't it? Well, I talk to them every day. We sit across the desk from each other. Yeah, but if there's 4 or 5 other people, they're not going to be open to having a discussion if there's an area that they want to. It might be something that's in their private life that's impacting work they want to talk about, and they're not going to do it in an open office. So it's just having that, and again going back to remote working, it's being able to recognise when people are struggling, or
it's even more important when somebody's working remotely, to make sure you have that conversation and you're checking in and you've got that structure in terms of those supervisions and one-to-ones. And I think if we're talking about what looks good, it's about celebrating those successes. And I think we, as human beings, we always have the nature to focus on the negatives all of the time. And if you want a really high performing team, you need to be celebrating the successes that individuals have, that the team has, that the organisation has, because again, it just helps with that engagement, and that's massive in terms of retention.
And I never understand that,
factor, isn't it? Yeah.
Why do businesses want to hide the good stuff? They don't talk about it. They don't shout about it. They don't even talk about it internally.
No.
So where's the example? Where's the standard?
But utilise those experts in those areas to train others. And harness those skills. Identify where your experts are in certain areas, and then use them. You might have an Excel expert. That they then buddy up or they mentor someone else.
And I guess that's again thinking about people that are working from home. When your experts are working from home, it's harder to learn from them than if they're in the office or in the workplace or whatever, wherever it is. So, how do we deal with it when it's going wrong? So they might have been with you for a few years and performance has just slackened off. How do you approach that?
Quickly.
Quickly.
Don't brush it under the carpet.
Don't brush it under Ignore it, wait for it to go away.
Get it out there. I think the first thing is really looking at what evidence you've got. What evidence can you be pulling together to sort of be clear with that individual where the performance is maybe slightly lacking, and be really, really clear about what sort of support, what sort of things are you going to be putting in place. And I think it's really... again, it's that quality of conversation, of creating that openness that somebody can let you know what's going on. Because if somebody's been a really good performer and then all of a sudden there's a dip in that performance, then there's something going on there. There's definitely something going on. And certainly in my experience over the years, it can be, if somebody's coming back from bereavement leave, for example, staff in the office might feel a little bit, I don't want to upset them, I don't want to say the wrong thing, so they end up saying nothing. Then that individual starts to feel more isolated,
excluded,
alongside the grief. So then that starts to have an impact on their performance levels. And by having that conversation, you can then sort of understand that and say, okay, how can we resolve that? And that might be for you as the manager, having a conversation with the rest of the staff, saying, look, just have the conversation, just open up that dialogue. Don't, then if they do get upset, we can deal with that. We can find ways to support people around that. So you've really got to sort of unpick what's what's going on a lot of the time. And then the other key area tends to be sort of menopause as well. That can have a real impact on women's performance at work in terms of, mood swings.
No.
Not getting any sleep. All of
brain fog,
all the hot flushes, whatever it might be, can have that impact on performance. And then you can really put a structured plan in place about how can you support somebody. But you have to have that quality conversation to begin with.
That is, I think business owners, managers find that really difficult.
Yeah.
And let's not make this a sexist issue, but I think men sometimes find it really uncomfortable to even start the subject on. Is this a menopausal?
Well, they try and make a joke out of it, and then it could be
sort of backfires.
So it goes again. Someone said to me once, "You keep changing colour."
Oh my gosh. But that's the thing, it's really hard. But the more you have those one-to-one conversations, the more you get to know that person, and the more it's more easier
to spot.
Raise it.
And it's more easier to spot when there's something not quite right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but because you've also got when it's not going quite so well, if you need to go more formal with some sort of capability process. But again, it's to be used as let's improve your performance rather than this is a way to get you out the door.
Yeah.
You put performance improvement plans together and follow a structured process. Yeah. And again, it's setting those expectations. But what support do they need? Are they clear on the objectives that they need to achieve?
Let's talk about the process a bit more so that people can understand that. So, in terms of a formal process, you've done your conversations. Yeah. You've tried to be supportive informally as much as you can, and tried to coax and encourage and coach, and you've done all of that, but it's still not working. The performance still isn't there. So what's the first step? Go on. I
was going to say the first formal meeting under your capability process. So following that structured meeting and then putting a performance improvement plan in place, which looks a little bit like SMART objectives. What is it they need to achieve? But again, I think it's important, like I think you mentioned earlier, is be very specific as to what the areas are, because it's so easy for people to say, well, your communication's just not good. That's not helpful.
You need some examples.
That's
what's
when the
good?
examples
Give me an
come
example
into play.
of why it's not good. Is it have you heard me over the phone? Is it written communication? So it's being specific and having those examples to then help the employee understand and say, well, what do you think went wrong with that particular example? Talk me through it. What lessons did we learn from it? So there, rather than this, I'm not for this tell, the manager sitting there telling them, well, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, because it can be really demoralising. It's more, let's talk about this example, this project that you ran. Let's talk through it. Let's look at where some of the things didn't go quite so according to plan. And what have we learnt from that? And then the employee is more likely to come forward and say, well, what I could do next time is this, this and this. There's your first action. And it makes it easier to...
So it needs to be a joined up approach. You need to be
much
working
more
on it together.
consultative rather than a telling. Otherwise you feel like you're at school.
And it can become hostile. That's the problem.
Absolutely.
So in terms of support that managers should be putting into place or that business owners need to be thinking about, what kind of support are we talking about?
I mean, that can be a whole variety of things, and obviously it depends on some of the reasons why the performance is dipped. And I think just sort of add on to what you were saying, I think there's also a bit in there about being clear why the performance needs to be at a certain level. So again, it sort of reinforces those expectations. But it can be additional training, it might be the buddying up, it might be, if it's a system issue, having a look at it, development around that. I think sometimes some of the more softer skills can be a little bit more difficult to be able to put the support around, especially if it is somebody's sort of personality or the way that they communicate or whatever. But I think some of it is about saying, we're aware of this behaviour. And this is the kind of behaviour that we are seeing that isn't acceptable in the workplace, and this is what we want you to work on.
This is how it's being received.
Yes, it's the perception of the other person, isn't it?
And emphasising that.
And I think, again, it's about being really clear about what that support is and putting in a realistic time frame for that individual to then get back up to the
and that's
standards
always
that they
the question,
need.
isn't it?
Is.
That is always the question.
How long?
How long have I got to wait for them to be good at this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you say, if it's a daily task, obviously you can then monitor it daily. But if it's a task they do once a month, then you might have to be doing it 3 months before you're able to assess whether they're competent at it. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's months, isn't it? Realistically,
realistically.
We're talking 3 or 6 months before you can ease off, or it goes to the next stage.
But also that support could be something related to, underlying health conditions, or a disability or dyslexia. There's people out there that will provide software that you can have on your computer. It could be support like that they might need. That hasn't necessarily been recognised. Yes, the reasonable adjustment thing.
So that would be an occupational health referral.
Yeah. Or an employee assistance program. If you've got a helpline for people that might be having like you said, a bereavement. You can then look at grievance counselling through an EAP.
I think people really underestimate the health bit, don't they?
Yeah.
Especially with situations like menopause and pregnancy.
I was going to say pregnancy.
I remember being absolutely useless when I was pregnant, completely useless. When you think back to how some of the decisions you made, what was I thinking?
And then you go through that whole uselessness again when you get to menopause.
But that's why you need a supportive team around you and a supportive manager who can have a tactful conversation about what's going on and what do you need.
Yeah, definitely. But
there is a lot of that outside help that can be brought in, because I do think sometimes business owner managers think they've got to have all of the solutions, they've got to have all of the answers, and that's not always the case. We do have like a wealth of people we can pull in to help support that individual and help support that manager, get that individual back up to the high performance
and
again.
the individual might know.
Yes.
Where you've worked before, how have they supported you before?
Yeah.
What works
what
with
worked
you?
well?
What worked well?
Yeah.
Give me, help me here. I've not dealt with this before. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
say, look, we need to look at support for you. What do you think it looks like?
Yeah.
And don't be afraid of
really
admitting that you don't know, because you don't have and we're not medical experts.
No.
And the manager's not medical experts.
Absolutely.
Unless they've got first-hand knowledge or experience of the similar issues. It's let's get that support.
So hopefully during this process, this person is going to improve and get better, and their performance is going to be amazing. And they're going to start winning company awards.
Yes.
But what happens when they don't? When do you get to the point, and how do you exit someone from that job or the company entirely?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is being really clear about what your policy is, because I do see it a lot. I'm sure you do as well, in terms of companies will have a policy, but they're just not following it.
Yes.
So whether that is, capability warnings, or whether it triggers into your disciplinary process, you need to be following your policy. So the first thing is, what does your policy say? So if you've set that performance improvement plan in place, and then that individual, you do your review, and that individual's still not there, then you would be going through either your performance capability or your disciplinary route, depending on how your policy is worded. To the point where, if this keep giving them the chances, it is a long process.
But it will follow
beat about the bush, but it'll go through the stages. And you need to be really clear with the individual at each stage what the consequences are of that performance not getting to the level if we end up in the next stage. So they should never get to the point of you dismissing them and they're not aware that might be an option.
Problem. Yeah.
And I feel like the majority of the time people either improve or they realise the job isn't for them, and then they take the decision to move on.
I think in my 35 years in HR, I could probably count on one hand how many people you'll end up going through a capability process and dismissal at the end of it.
Yeah.
Because it's either corrected itself or they've decided the job's not for them, because there's certain, they've recognised that. But I also think it's quite good to have a capability and a disciplinary, because you really want to deal with disciplinary as misconduct. But I do have a lot of clients that, it follows the same first warning, probably, final warning, and then potentially dismissal. But the wording needs to be slightly softer. That the conduct issue tends to be naughtiness.
That technical term. You've been naughty. Wipe that finger.
I was trying to think of the right word. Misconduct, as opposed to it being a capability. So it's that will and
can't do versus
will and can't.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that can be difficult for a manager to understand as well, about, because sometimes you'll see that somebody's performance comes back up to the levels, then it dips. You start the process again, back up for a period of time, then it dips. So there is they can do. You know, they've demonstrated that they can do, but for some reason they're just not performing. It's dipping every now and then. It's not sustainable. So that's when you might then take it into the won't do disciplinary arena.
One.
So have a process, follow it.
Yes.
Proactively performance manage your team.
Yes.
That's it. Simple.
That's it.
Yeah. And the only other thing is make sure you've got appeals at every stage as well. Make sure you've got appeals process. And
the right to accompaniment. Like
you
would with your disciplinaries.
Yeah. Process is everything.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, ladies. This was absolutely brilliant. It's so really, really helpful. And I'm sure anyone that's listening, if they've got questions about performance management, then they know where to come.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.